Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. It turns out that Westminster gave the SNP Government of Scotland £60 million. This was meant to be for relief and assistance after all the flooding from Storm Babette. How much of that money do you think the SNP gave to the victims? The money, that it was intended to go to these people. How much do you think they gave? That's right. None at all. They claim they've got their best interests at heart, that they're going to do this and they're going to do this. It's all talk, no action. The 60 million just disappeared into central funds to be reallocated, presumably, I think, to some kind of hidden account somewhere abroad, numbered well away from prying eyes, so that when they finally hit the last day, they can all sit in their, their little countries that they're flown to, non-extradition, of course, and then have enough money to last the rest of their lives. Seems to be the way of the world, doesn't it, with these people? But not one brass farthing went out of that 60 million to helping the people for whom it was meant. No flood defences were fixed, no assistance in rebuilding their lives. None of it. 60 million evaporated. You have to wonder where all the money is going. If they've got £1 billion black hole, it isn't from a lack of generosity of the United Kingdom government. It is all to do with, I think, sheer thievery and corruption within the SNP. But we'll take a look at this story to see where the money went and why people didn't get it. Here goes. So, SNP government fail to utilise £60 million of Westminster funding to help flooding victims. I don't suppose anyone's surprised, I don't think anyone will be surprised at hearing that the SNP were given money and didn't pass it on. I think it's time. We did a story yesterday with something similar. So I think it's time the UK government wised up and learnt exactly what the SNP are and what they're doing. And instead, in future, when things like this happen, they give the money directly to the councils affected and let the councils deal with it at a local level, rather than just have the money disappear and be utilised for their own other, needs like independence via the SNP government. Money given to them never reaches the intended end, user, if you will. The UK government switched £60 million of resource funding and allocated it to help deal with the fallout of Storm Babette. But this was not utilised by SNP ministers. Well, colour me surprised. I don't think there's anyone surprised at all that this was the case. They've got a history of it, haven't they? The Scottish Government failed to utilise the money reallocated by the UK Government to help flood-hit families following the devastation caused by Babette. SNP ministers raided the homelessness funds to fund grants for Angus residents who were the worst hit by the freak weather. But of course there is other problems with that, and we will come to this, because one of the problems is they can't rehouse them, and we all know why. There's no housing available. The SNP executive did not spend any of the £60 million of capital funding, which meant Westminster switched to resource cash to allow them to use the money to help with the recovery. UK officials did say that Holyrood can spend it in other areas as it saw fit, but it won't ever find it fit to spend it where it's needed, spend it on actual people. Now, the Scottish Daily Express can reveal that the cash was not handed out to help with the situation. We asked whether this cash was utilised and told that the 60 million the UK government has referred to as being available for flood response is simply an accounting switch of already committed spend. They're trying to spin it, aren't they? They're trying to spin it so that nobody actually will get helped. And that, of course, is the problem. Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack announced the switch in November, weeks after Storm Babette caused chaos in the northeast, flooding hundreds of properties in the likes of Angus and Aberdeenshire. We did the story at the time and it was devastating, wasn't it? He said, responding to flooding is a devolved responsibility and the Scottish Government allocates its own resources and finances in this area. I suggest that it does not allocate resources and finances in this area. It keeps them very much for themselves. The switch of this 60 million, he said, could help provide certainty and reassure those in flood-affected areas across Scotland. Yeah, it could. The word could does half carry a lot of weight in that sentence. It does the heavy lifting, because while there's could, there's no actual help, is there? In correspondence about Storm Babette, the government officials even boasted that the financial help being given was more generous than England. Well, it's obviously not, because in England you'll probably get the help because they won't steal it. Not so in Scotland. Briefing notes read, DFM, oh God help us, when she's involved you know nothing's going to happen. I mean, her job should be at any meeting with the one to sit in the corner and colouring in and try and keep within the lines, you know. If she's eating the purple ones. Anyway, she chaired the first ministerial task force meeting following the Scottish Government announced grant support for those affected by Babette. They wanted to give 1,500 for individuals and 3,000 for businesses, which is not really a lot. I mean, 1,500 would barely buy you a half-decent front door, you know. That's similar provided in 2015-16 for Storms Dedman and Frank. So you're talking nearly 10 years later and, no increase in value. Do you know, the inflation is really bitten. So it's a major cut in funding. It said it's more generous than the core elements provided in England. Well, it is if they get the money. But they're not getting the money, and that's the whole bloody point. Angus residents were also allowed to access a share of £100,000 from the government's homelessness funds, on top of the grants already announced, and it was intended for families who have lost everything due to devastating weather, and it was meant to provide temporary accommodation. Now, of course, you can't have temporary accommodation if there's no accommodation. And that, of course, is a problem because there is no accommodation. Why? Because migrants. And this is here. We're going to have a look at this. The SNP-led council is still struggling to house those made homeless by flooding, with the ministerial task force being told that rehousing residents would have major implications for meeting housing needs in the medium to long term. And it was so concerning that the local authority asked the government to ask the Home Office to stop housing migrants in the area, because these migrants, these illegal immigrants, we'd stop calling them migrants, immigrants, come to this country, never contributed, and yet we as taxpayers have to pay for them to live in houses, while our own people who've worked and raised and done everything in this country sit on the streets. It's wrong. Incidentally, quick tangent, another piece I saw earlier. British government, how much do you think they've spent on housing illegal immigrants? No, more. £5.6 billion. 5.6 billion. Unbelievable. You pays your money, you takes your choice. People keep voting for government to allow this to happen. People keep paying money for, or keep voting for their own culture to be diluted and eradicated. Meanwhile, illegals keep coming over and we don't know who they are. We don't know what they've done. We don't know what is coming in. And yet this government, and any government, Labour won't be any different, will refuse to do anything in case they're seen as being the bad guys. It'd be a different kettle of fish if I was in charge, but that's a different video for a different day. Notes from the summit read, Angus Council requested assistance with lobbying UK government to exempt Angus from UK Home Office refugee and asylum seeker programmes, and specifically the work with MEAs and the modelling future housing demand. The Nationalist Executive agreed to engage with UK ministers to request whether Angus Council can be exempted for seeking more asylum seekers. They're not asylum seekers. They're illegal immigrants. They're people coming here because they think they're going to get a better life. There's no asylum. You're not getting asylum when you're coming from France. France is safe. Anyway, we'll round that off there and come up. But it goes to show you can't house people. No, none of the money that's been given goes to the people who need it. And even if it did, you couldn't house them because there's nothing available. Coming up. Well, not really a lot to add. It's no surprise the SNP have had the money and run. They're building up their funds. They're never going to pass it on to people. They don't do that. That's the SNP for you. Never help if they can steal. Anyway, I'll draw it there. Thanks very much for watching. Do please hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, leave a like, leave a comment, please share the video, and I will speak to you later. Bye.